Hello, everybody. This is AM 1240 Hot News Talk Radio. You're listening to Clutch with Keon Rose. That's me. Thank you for joining me today, giving me just a little bit of your time. Before I jump into anything, I'd like to tell you about the different platforms that we have. Platforms, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook. We're on all of those. You have no excuses for not reaching out and contacting us. All of our shows are on YouTube. And if you search Hot News Talk Radio, guess what? Bam. We're the first thing that comes up. First. And if you want to listen to us, mentioned YouTube before, you can also listen to us on hotnewstalkradio.com and the TuneIn Radio app. It's absolutely free. If you're in the Apple Store or the Google Play Store, download it to your mobile device, search Hot News Talk Radio. Give us a follow. Press play. You'll have Hot News Talk Radio everywhere you go. And you can catch the Super Bowl right here. Super Bowl 50. Hot News Talk Radio is the home of that. Here in Chattanooga, we are the only place that you can get the pregame, the big game, and the postgame. Not to mention the week after analysis right here on Clutch with Keon Rose. So, I'll play a little Monday evening quarterback for after the game. Tomorrow is my last day on the air for this week, and then I will give you my pick for who will win the Super Bowl, even though, as I have discussed on multiple occasions, I hate picks. So we'll jump to another thing that I do not like very much, but today is the singular exception. Today is the day that is the exception. Recruiting. College football recruiting. It seems, if you're not just in it constantly, it's the most mysterious thing on earth. It's because there's just so many moving parts. There's just so many moving pieces, and all of those moving pieces are 17 to 18-year-old boys. So, like, who can know what they're thinking anyway? It's already hard to keep track of. And then on top of that, you've got people committing to a school and then decommitting the day of National Signing Day. And you've got, you got guys putting on different hats. You've got people with different cakes with whatever school that they might choose on that day, and it becomes this whole overdramatic situation. And I like National Signing Day. That's fun. You just follow all of the news, and you're seeing all of these commits going in all these different directions. It's like the first day of NBA free agency. It's fun. It's fun, but recruiting up until today is uninteresting. Let's say that. So National Signing Day, I've got the news there for you. But before we get there, before we get into National Signing Day, because that's a whole that'll take the show. I'd like to mention that we had a game last night that nobody paid attention to because I don't believe that. I believe we thought we knew the outcome. Okay, Tennessee played Kentucky in a basketball game last night. I think we all know Tennessee's probably not going to make the tournament, barring some miracle and maybe a lot of money changing hands to pay off the committee or something. Tennessee's not going to make the tournament. They haven't won enough games. They haven't been nearly consistent enough. They haven't been nearly good enough in a conference that's basketball speaking kind of weak. I mean, you've got A&M, you've got Kentucky, you've got Georgia, and that's about it in terms of consistency of those schools. So you write Tennessee off when they're playing at Kentucky. I know this is a down year for Kentucky. Kentucky hasn't been good. Okay. And it's weird because they're just one season removed from basically almost running the table, going undefeated and winning a national title. It's weird to see that. Kentucky, though, the better team between them and Tennessee. I don't think that is up for debate in any way. And yet, Tennessee plays Kentucky last night. They start losing the game. They're down big. And, I didn't pay attention to the game at all. I was just kind of following the scores on my phone. And then after a while, I was like, okay, this game's not any good. And it's Kentucky doing to Tennessee what we thought they were going to do to Tennessee in the first place. Somewhere between when I stopped paying attention, somewhere in the first, 9 minutes of that game and the end, Tennessee turned it on. Tennessee turned it on, and it was incredible. And I feel bad that I missed it, but the Volunteers beat the Kentucky Wildcats, and we learned some things in that game. Okay, beat them 84-77. Kentucky is ranked 20th. I mean, they're obviously not going to be ranked 20th anymore. But, I mean, Kentucky is still, in my opinion, the more talented of the two teams. And Rick Barnes just proved that Tennessee's got the more talented of the two coaches. I think. John Calipari's coaching, his coaching leaves a lot to be desired in terms of the strategy of the game. John Calipari can be outcoached. Okay, he's got talent. He gets the most talented players year in and year out. Okay, and he's probably going to have the most talented players next year. So this is a down year. They're bouncing back, right? But year in and year out, Kentucky almost always more talented. But I wouldn't say that John Calipari is one of the better coaches from a tactical perspective. And even Rick Barnes isn't like the best. He's got his moments where you're just looking at an offense completely stagnate. You look over at Rick, and Buddy doesn't look like he's got a clue. That being said, overwhelmingly, Rick Barnes knows what he's doing. And he's a good recruiter in his own right. Mentioned before my suspicions with Kevin Durant, because how do you get a guy to come from DC to Texas? And I don't know how he made it happen. That guy was a great basketball player coming out of high school. I don't know how you make that happen. I'm just suspicious is all. Just suspicious. But Rick Barnes been able to recruit, and I think he's got talented enough players on this team. And I think that the more talented they become, the more he and Tennessee as a result are going to shine. But just with Kevin Punter Jr. and Armani Moore, who we talked about them earlier in the season. I mean, these guys are solid, but last night they just went bonkers, and they were down 21. They were down 21 points. Armani Moore goes for 18 points and 13 rebounds, gets the double-double, and Kevin Punter Jr. scores 27, just drops 27 on Kentucky in a game where you look up at the scoreboard, you realize, A, you're playing Kentucky, and B, you're down 21. I would not have expected Tennessee to not roll over and die in that situation. To me, that's your typical roll over and die situation. It's a regular season game. Save your energy. Save it. Hang in there. And no, those guys fought back. And Kentucky, you could argue. I wouldn't. That's not my particular stance, but you could argue has in Tyler Ulis the best point guard in the country. Okay, this guy's going to be a draft pick and a pretty high one. And they made him look ineffective. They took Tyler Ulis out of the game. Okay, and Rick Barnes' teams can play defense, but he's not like a defensive guy. That has not typically been like his calling card is just defense. He's a good coach, but offense is where he's historically excelled. And seeing Tennessee just turn it on, you're like, no, that's the Rick Barnes that you were hoping to see when you hired him from Texas. The reason why he got run from Texas isn't because he can't coach, and I say this over and over again. He got run from Texas because he wasn't winning in the tournament. He's a great coach. And watching that game's highlights, because of course I gave up on the game. I didn't plan on watching it in the first place. I didn't watch it. Followed the score on my phone for about 8 to 9 minutes. And apparently that was too soon to give up. If I had just stayed a little bit longer. So if you're a Vols fan, you stuck in there, that's what sports are for. Like, that's what that's about. Your team's down 21 and you hang in there, you get rewarded for it. But I can't even imagine where your head's at if you're a Kentucky fan, because you're in tournament danger as well. I think. I mean, you've got enough bad losses this season that, you know, I don't know. I don't know what you do. I mean, Tennessee's got your number, by the way, if you're Kentucky. You're Kentucky. Tennessee has beaten you more than any other team. And it's crazy because, I mean, this is not a school that has historically been like the best basketball school, Tennessee. Tennessee's got a great basketball legacy, but most of that has to do, in my opinion, with Pat Summitt and how great a coach she was for the women's team. From the men's side, I mean, you've got great Tennessee players, but overwhelmingly, they haven't been basketball. You know what I mean? So that was an interesting thing. I had to talk about that when I saw the score this morning. I looked at that and went, "You've got to be kidding me." How do they come back? And Kentucky plays against Florida on Saturday. They've got a lot of ground to make up if they're going to try and make this tournament. And Tennessee's probably going to be in the NIT. They're probably not going to make the NCAA tournament, but that's a bright future you got going on for you, especially if you're able to hold on to Punter Jr. and Armani Moore moving forward. That's a scary duo of guys, and I'm interested in seeing who Barnes is able to bring in next. But Rick Barnes, that's his signature Tennessee win so far. I think you're Tennessee basketball fan, you needed to see that. You really did. Okay, not that you hadn't seen enough already, because I think there were some good wins from earlier in the season, but this was the signature win. You're listening to AM 1240, Hot News Talk Radio, Clutch with Keon Rose. Now, on to National Signing Day. We've got to move forward into that because I've got a few notes here. I had to take notes. I was taking notes all day. National Signing Day is one of those days that it happens and the day's over for me. Like, I don't do anything else. That's the day. So as soon as I got out from my day job, basically just National Signing Day. And it's fun, but it is frustrating because there's just so much last second stuff happening, especially around 2 p.m, that I really appreciate the Wisconsins of the world. I really appreciate the Baylors of the world that just had their recruits nicely wrapped up around 9:45 a.m. You just look at the school and go, yeah, no, they're done. All the people that committed to going to Baylor and committed to going to Wisconsin went to Baylor and went to Wisconsin. Like, there's no mysteries there. That is exactly what happened. That feels great. Unfortunately, I live in Tennessee, and some things in this conference just did not get handled right away. But it was fun to see, as per usual, the SEC completely dominated the National Signing Day. Like, you're looking at where these recruits are coming from. I think 24/7 Sports really had a great map. The map has all of these recruits, and it doesn't matter where they got recruited to. You know, that could be Southern California, it could be Stanford, it could be Washington, Oregon, Texas, even Michigan. Those schools, those recruits, for the most part, are coming from the South. They're mostly coming from the South. In fact, that was one of the interesting things that I noticed about National Signing Day today. I was looking down Alabama's list of students that they recruited. A lot of those guys, not from Alabama. A lot of those guys are from out of the South. And I think Alabama did a really good job of convincing players outside of the South to go to Alabama. It's nuts that they can do that. And when you win a national title, like, that's an easier thing to do, to convince somebody to come play where you're at. But watching where players came from, Alabama was pulling guys from Texas. They're pulling guys from DC. Got a couple of recruits from New York. Meanwhile, all the schools outside of the South, your Michigans, your Stanfords, your Texases, are trying to reach. I mean, I consider Texas to be the West, by the way, but they're trying to reach into the South and get talent. And it's funny to me because for years, this narrative has always been, I mean, not always, but like for the past 3 seasons, it's been look, the SEC's dying. It's fading out. It's going away. Florida State wins a national title, and we're like, okay, that's the backbreaker. The SEC's gone, and everyone was willing to sweep them away. And at the beginning of the season, you had guys like Colin Cowherd, who was on this very station, AM 1240 Hot News Talk Radio, dismissing Alabama and saying they're done. And when they lost to Ole Miss, everybody buried Alabama. Well, Alabama comes out, they win a national title, and quite frankly, they won National Signing Day. They've got the best recruiting class of all the schools. They got the number one recruiting class, brought in 24 recruits, 3 5-stars, 14 4-stars, and 7 3-stars. And a lot of these guys, defensive tackles, linebackers. Defensive tackles and linebackers. Which is crazy because Alabama won a national title with an offensive output that I don't believe that anyone was prepared to give them credit for, because they just didn't believe Alabama could throw the ball, which is nuts, but there you go. But Alabama making sure that the defense stays strong. Like, to me, that is their biggest strength still. And we saw it again at the linebacker position with Alabama. There's just their depth and their versatility that comes from being able to run a bunch of guys through. You know, guys can come out and take a breather and come back in later, or you're playing a school that's faster, so you're going with your faster set of guys as opposed to your bigger set of guys, or you're playing an LSU who plays more of a power style like you. Well, you beef up, you bring in your bigger guys. I mean, they have such depth, and you know, getting guys like Raekwon Davis and like Kendall Jones really helps to bolster this defense that's already terrifying. Like, Alabama's already super scary, but they're not the only team. The SEC just dominated the top 25 of recruiting classes. Alabama was first, obviously. LSU had the third best recruiting class. Ole Miss was 6th, Georgia 7th, Auburn 9th, Florida 13th, Tennessee was 14th. And I put Miami in there at 20th because, you know, I was just interested in seeing what Mark Richt did. And Mark Richt brought in, you know, he got the 20th best recruiting class to Miami, which has fallen on such hard times. And he did it on a very short amount of recruiting time. Like, Mark Richt didn't have a ton of time to recruit, to the point where Georgia's ranked 7th. Okay. And while I want to give a lot of credit to Kirby Smart for doing that, I'm going to say that a good chunk of that is Mark Richt's doing. And then those guys committed to Georgia, and once you're committed to Georgia, I mean, you really don't back out. That's a school that's big and historic and in its own right, indomitable. So you don't back out from going to Georgia. But I believe that Mark Richt did a lot of damage to get Georgia the recruiting class that they had, and then Kirby Smart held on to it. Where you can honestly say with Miami, I don't know who was thrilled about Miami football before Mark Richt got there. And now he's there, and he's put together a recruiting class that's pretty intense. Okay, they're top 20 in the nation. And again, he didn't have a ton of time to do that. As soon as he got fired, he got to work, which was a cool story to hear. Like, he jumped from one job to the other job, and as soon as he got in it, he didn't take any time off. He just immediately got to work. And they're ahead of Arkansas and South Carolina in the recruiting rankings, according to Rivals.com. And that's a whole thing unto itself. Rivals is probably the most reliable of all of them. Rivals, you could go 24/7. ESPN has its college recruiting page. I don't trust that, okay? I do not trust the ESPN college football recruiting page. ESPN's metric is weird. You know, they've got Alabama as low as 6th in theirs. I don't know what they're ranking that on or what they're rating that with, but it just seems odd and weird. They have their ESPN top 300. I don't know anybody that uses that, like, besides ESPN employees, because you have to. Stick with Rivals. All right. And according to Rivals.com, again, the Tennessee 14th ranked recruiting class, that's good because you want to be around that top 10. You historically, and I can pull the numbers up for you, but historically, you don't win a national title if you're not in and around the top 10. If you don't average recruiting classes around there, you're just not winning one. So we'll get into Tennessee's recruiting class. I think that they did a great job as well in addressing some of their needs and some of those deficiencies that they had because Tennessee did a great job, I believe, of moving the ball up and down the field. Scoring was not a problem for the Vols. Where your big problem was, and a Tennessee fan knows this better than anybody else, was defense. That didn't really turn up until the second half of the Georgia game and the Alabama game. Then Tennessee kind of found their footing. So we'll talk about that here on Clutch with Keon Rose on AM 1240 Hot News Talk Radio next.
AM 1240 Hot News Talk Radio, the home of Super Bowl 50. From pregame to postgame, the Panthers face the Broncos. Here on the exciting action live, Tennessee Valley's home for the NFL and Super Bowl 50. AM 1240 HotNewsTalkRadio.com.
You give us 12 minutes and 40 seconds, we'll give you Chattanooga and the world.
News Talk 1240.
Lay your burdens down at the Woodhouse. Leave all your worries at the door. The perfect gift for the perfect match. Surprise her with a Woodhouse gift card. Call us today at 423-443-4478 or visit us online at chattanooga.woodhousespas.com.
On your signature, you can get $150,000. Can you believe that? $150,000 on your signature. Hi, I'm Bruce Krebs with the Entrepreneur Source. There's a program right now that you can get $150,000 on your signature with no pledge of collateral or personal guarantee. Call me at 423-875-5621 to learn more. 423-875-5621. You've been thinking about starting a business and becoming self-sufficient. Don't do it on your own. I have a proven track record for the last 13 years, a 96% success rate. I can guide you into a franchise where you will pay yourself through the startup phase with very low or little risk. Call me now. I'm Bruce Krebs at 423-875-5621. 875-5621. And make sure to listen to the Entrepreneur Hour every other Wednesday from 11 to 12 o'clock here at AM 1240 Hot News Talk Radio. Call me now, 875-5621.
You need a place for your party or maybe a wedding reception for 100 or even more. Maybe you'd like to host a small trade show for your business and you need a very affordable venue. Are you looking for a place for your birthday gala or services to start up a church? Look no further than the Hidden Gem in Hickson. It's an overlooked, newly appointed reception hall right here in Hickson, Tennessee. Big space, small price. That's right, big space, small price. Call Mr. Chu and ask for a tour. 316-7388. That's 423-316-7388. He'll tell you a lot more about the venue. Rent this venue today. Just call 423-316-7388 and ask for Mr. Chu.
I'm blowing everything up. We're starting over. I'm doing a new show. I want guys who push it to the middle of the table and go over the top. Take a risk, fail miserably. I'm right, and I'm not wrong, and I'll never back down. Conflict works. Allow it.
It's The Herd with Colin Cowherd. Right here and everywhere. Noon Eastern.
You give us 12 minutes and 40 seconds, we'll give you Chattanooga and the world.
News Talk 1240.
Expect clear skies to continue through the nighttime. Cold and frosty again overnight, lows 30 to 32. For Saturday, though, a beautiful day. Lots of sunshine, a nice warming trend, highs 60 to 63. And for Sunday, continue dry and pleasant, highs back into the lower 60s. This forecast is brought to you by Hamilton Medical Center in Dalton. Proud to be named #1 by CareChex for medical excellence and overall hospital care in the Northwest Georgia and Chattanooga region. And I'm 1412 Chief Meteorologist Patrick Orr.
On AM 1240 Hot News Talk Radio.
When the weather turns bad, turn to AM 1240 Hot News Talk Radio. On the net, hotnewstalkradio.com. Follow us on Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook. From the Hot News Talk Radio Weather Center. Chattanooga, we've got you covered. When the weather turns bad, the Tennessee Valley turns to Hot News Talk Radio.
Go, 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 go. You give us 12 minutes and 40 seconds, we'll give you Chattanooga and the world.
News Talk 1240.
National Signing Day. If you are Tennessee, LSU, Alabama, Auburn, you did good. You had a good day. But honestly, though, who has a recruiting class that's around there, your top 10, top 15, and you're not satisfied? Like, most people are usually satisfied with their recruiting class. One or two guys will get away. I think Tennessee stole Bird from Florida. One or two guys will get away. But you usually get most of the people you were hunting down, right? Like, that. Usually that's how that goes. If you're getting in the top 15 recruiting class and you're one of those schools that has been up top in National Signing Day. So great job for Tennessee again. Tennessee was higher last year, I believe. So, this is the year of no excuses for Butch Jones and the Volunteers. You have to think that because of how long he's been there now, which is enough to recruit players. You've got a few top 15 recruiting classes under your belt. You've got about 3, and you're looking at that, and it's about time. It's about time to do the things that good teams do. You don't lose the games that you're supposed to win. The games that you're supposed to win, you win convincingly. The games that you're not supposed to win, you win those. So it's time to put up or shut up for Tennessee here, because you hear this. Every Vols fan on earth is going to tell you, like, this is what you hear last year from everybody. The team is young. They're going to grow. They're young. Like, okay, we get it. Like, you're young, but that's a lot of schools. Okay, that's lots of people have young quarterbacks. I mean, it happens. So again, this year you're not going to be young. A lot of those guys that were sophomores a year ago, they're juniors, they're upperclassmen. It's time to start winning some games, or you're going to have to look at the coach and go, he can't do this. And this is not me calling for Butch Jones, because again, this is the offseason. It's too hasty. Okay, the Alabama wins National Signing Day every year. It's like, so what? Al Davis and the Raiders would win the offseason every year, and they don't have anything to show for it, at least not in the last 20 years, for sure. So it doesn't matter. But when it comes to how the perception of this school is, which is that, that they're a bunch of upstart young guys and it's going to be okay. Well, I mean, it's not going to be okay. It's not going to be okay because now they're juniors. All right, the guys that Butch Jones recruited, they're juniors now. Juniors and seniors. That's where we're headed. So we're going to have to see where he goes next with this. I think it's put up or shut up time this season. I don't think that means, he should be on the chopping block or anything like that, but we came out with a lot of high expectations for this team last year. And then we started to walk all of those back. Really, the first game of the season, we started to walk all of those back because they won. They scored a lot of points, but they gave up a lot of points too to, don't remember the name of the school right now, but to a school that should not have scored that many points on them, as the first week in college football usually goes. Like, you're just walking that one back, and the excuse is, well, they were young. Okay, that's gone now. That crutch is gone. This is your third top 15 recruiting class. Put up or shut up. Right? Like, that's what it is. I mean, you just did such a great job recruiting that you've actually built up these expectations, and I don't think that's fair. And I talked about that too. It's how unfair that is to have these wild, bizarre expectations and to throw them on a coach and say, hey, go out there and go get it for us because you recruited so well. And it's like, no, I still have to develop this talent. I still have to beat teams that are really, really good. I don't know if you noticed, but that Jim McElwain Florida team was really good at the first half of that season. And, losing to them, that's a loss that's respectable. You would like to have won it because you had it. You all but did. The Oklahoma loss, again, another heartbreaker. But again, a respectable loss. You would like to have won it because just like the Florida game, you all but did. and you were close enough to beat Alabama. You have some respectable losses in there, but I think that you're getting to the point in Butch Jones's tenure where people are tired of hearing about respectable losses, and you really just want to start seeing W's because we're that level of impatient. I think you should give him even more time. I think that means that he should have even more time because it's hard to beat some of these schools, and you're going to have to get a little lucky. You know, you're going to have to wish for a down year from an Alabama. You know, Auburn had a down year. Who's to say that now they're not swinging back up? Like, you just don't know. So having said that, Butch Jones, he should be fine. But like you look at that and you're like, well, Mark Richt wasn't fine and he didn't do anything wrong. Okay, he did one thing wrong. He had that weird start he started Fatan Bauta for no good reason. But outside of that, he didn't do anything wrong, and then away he goes, and you almost lose Les Miles. So, and that is an interesting one, too. This is AM 1240 Hot News Talk Radio, Clutch with Keon Rose. Just going down the doings and happenings of National Signing Day. Alabama, again, puts together another monster recruiting class. Tennessee has another great National Signing Day, and the pressure that's mounting on Butch Jones comes from that. It's not like Butch Jones is having to try and find ways to win games with scrubs. He doesn't have scrubs on this team. Okay, he's got a talented football team. Where the pressure is going to come from for him, and I think for a guy like Les Miles, because LSU was third, okay, and you're still going to have Fournette, and you know we're looking for, did you address those needs? LSU's got to have a quarterback. They just don't have one that's dynamic and that complements Fournette. The skill positions for them really are areas of weakness. Outside of running back, it's really rough because I don't think that their offensive line is bad. I think they're very good. I think they got dominated by Alabama last year, but more or less, they did a good job. Defensively, yeah, you could always add more defensively. If that's your argument. There's always more to be desired on the defensive side of the ball, especially in the SEC where defense is such a premium. So, yeah, you could always argue for that. But ultimately, I think that LSU really needs the skill position boost. I think that that's where they needed it. And you got a top 3 recruiting class. There's no reason to not have filled those holes. So before we go further into that, I'd like to go back to the map we were talking about of where all the recruits come from. It's at a Twitter source called Sports Source A. And I'll put the link up on the Facebook page and I'll retweet it. So make sure to follow Hot News Talk Radio on Facebook and Twitter. It's a really cool map of just where all schools are getting their talent from. And basically, it's everybody is just in the South. Tennessee got a lot of people from Tennessee. LSU got a lot of people from Louisiana. And then everybody else in the nation showed up. And you've got Oregon State down in Arkansas. And you've got Stanford down in Mississippi. And you're just looking at it and going, wow. Everybody really just comes to the South to take players. So I don't understand how the SEC gets to be at such this huge disadvantage when all of the talent is literally in our backyard. It's almost quite literally. You could just turn around and find somebody. Like, who in this conference doesn't have a student that went to Brentwood Academy? You know, like everybody did. Just that's one of the big schools. You just have to have someone from there. You know what I mean? So it's interesting to see that this bias that everyone thinks exists, because it's weird. If you're in the SEC and you live here, you feel like the media is ready to bury your team when that may not actually be the case. It could just be people are tired of hearing you and hearing about you and hearing about all of your winning. And let's face it, not a bunch of graceful winners, especially Alabama fans. Not the most graceful winners. Winning with dignity is not a thing that they have heard of. Just from what I've seen on Twitter and the internet, it's not a thing. usually a lot of unnecessary trash talking begins. And yeah, so you have Alabama winning a national title, and you gotta keep up with that. It's like its own nuclear proliferation. You're just trying to keep up with them, and the talent is all here. And so you're looking at a school, and you're like, well, if I'm up north, I have to fight harder to convince a guy to come from down south up north. Like if I'm Urban Meyer, I'm convincing guys to come up on my name, basically. You know, sure, there's a lot to playing for the Ohio State, but going to the Ohio State and having to pass the Crimson Tide and having to pass the Volunteers and having to pass Ole Miss and all of these schools with great football history. It's like to go to a school up north where it's cold. That's harder work. So of course, in my opinion, it stands to reason that the SEC would be better if all the talent is coming from right nearby, and you don't have to convince somebody to go, 1,000 miles away from mom and dad into a place where it's cold or into a place that's completely unfamiliar. It's not rocket science. It's just an obvious thing. So the long and short of it is the National Signing Day kind of resets that meter of, oh, well, I guess the SEC is a good conference. When you're outside of the conference, you feel like people never shut up about them. When you're inside, you feel like nobody says enough. And I think that that's just the stance of anybody and the team or teams that they support is, yeah, you'd love to hear more about your team. Okay. I mean, I hear not on a regular basis, but often enough that, I don't talk about Florida enough, or I don't talk about Mississippi State enough. And it's just that for a good chunk of the season last season, they didn't matter all that much. Like I talked about Florida while they were still good. Just didn't happen for very long because obviously you have the suspension to Will Grier, and then you're just not a good football team after that. Like you needed a quarterback, and you had one, and then he got suspended for using drugs that made him Barry Bonds size. So, I mean, it's not a bias. No one is trying to pass over the SEC, but at least the coverage is a little bit more fair in terms of who is actually good and who isn't, because I think that outside of the SEC and outside of this conference, people want to dismiss the SEC because they're tired of all the winning and they're tired of hearing about it all the time. They're just sick and tired, as my mom always used to say, sick and tired of being sick and tired. So it was good. It was good to see that, a bunch of schools got a great recruiting class. I'm just looking at it and going, well, like what? It's a two-edged sword. You recruit well, people start to have expectations of you of winning, especially if you're a school like LSU, like Tennessee, where you're a good school. And honestly, there was a point in the discussion before we really got to the committee and the playoff watch and all of that stuff, where you're just like, man, they're hanging around here. You know what I mean? Like you had to pray for a bunch of losses if you were Tennessee to really move up. You needed a lot of help. Once you lost that game to Florida and Oklahoma, you had to beat at least one of the two of those schools to really, really have a chance at being in that conversation, especially since Tennessee's strength of schedule was really solid last year. You got the one school that you're supposed to just blow out of the gym at the beginning of the season and then somewhere in the middle. But overall, Tennessee played the second half of their schedule was much easier than the first. And I think that the first half of their schedule is going to be tough again next year, if I'm not mistaken. And I think that that's the smart way to play it. If you're going to take your loss early enough that people can start to see you trending upward. If you're trending upward and then you lose at the end, that's what looks worse. Unfortunately for Tennessee, they lost two games that they shouldn't have lost instead of one. And, we were all in panic and it was panic mode. And then what do you do then? But jumping back to LSU and their class, because they got 3 They got ranked nationally 3, second in the SEC. And the interesting thing about them is that LSU, obviously, they tried to push Les Miles out of his coaching job last season. And then the fans and students and just a lot of Les Miles supporters, because there are a ton of those, just people who will just ride and die with him, kept his job, basically. But how much longer could Les Miles justify his job if he doesn't put together a season that's stellar? Because that's hard to do in the SEC. And again, their positional problem is quarterback. I think that they did a really good job getting wide receivers, getting other running backs, because you're not going to have Fournette forever, and getting better at the defensive side of the ball and beefing up offensive line some more. I'm really happy with that. But outside of Lindsey Scott, I don't see a quarterback here. And that's a huge problem for them, especially with that system that they run. You run into a team like Alabama. Alabama derailed their entire season. I think that 3-game losing streak that they had that started with Alabama started because of Alabama. That the way that they just got stifled was almost like the blueprint of how to beat them. If you can contain Leonard Fournette without having to blitz, which again is a difficult, tall order to ask, but if you can, well then there's nothing else to stop you. The quarterback for them, he's okay. And then like at wide receiver, there's nobody dangerous. So it's encouraging to see them add wide receiver. But again, to add some more quarterback competition, I don't think that could have hurt. But they brought in a dual threat quarterback. Lindsey Scott is the guy. So we could see him a few years down the road. And it's one of those things that takes patience. College recruits. Like you see the good recruiting class. Well, that doesn't pay off until, 2-3 years from now. It takes a little bit of patience to have a recruiting class this year and know, like 2 years down the road, that's going to really mean something. Like, yeah, you're going to have guys that come in and redshirt. That's fun. Okay, you've got some guys that'll come in, they'll redshirt, they'll be ready to go. Some freshmen that come in and contribute right away. But by and large, I mean, these guys are going to be doing stuff for you next year. Okay, and so your LSU, you don't have to worry about a quarterback right now. I just thought they might have gone after, a couple of different kinds. But their recruiting day, obviously, 3rd ranked in the nation. You don't need me to tell you how that went. Okay, they did a great job, and I think at least the needs of wide receiver for them and running back depth are being addressed, because they were so one-dimensional. Like if Leonard Fournette couldn't break it, it wasn't happening for them. This is AM 1240, Hot News Talk Radio. You're listening to Clutch with Keon Rose. Big day today, National Signing Day, breaking down the ins and outs, the doings and happenings of that. And of course, in the first segment, we talked about Tennessee beating Kentucky, which was just a huge upset that I'm sure nobody saw coming. Definitely probably bumped Kentucky out of the top 25 in the nation. And of course, I don't know, Kentucky has a few more losses. Tennessee could have just ruined their national tournament hopes their tournament hopes for March Madness. It's definitely possible. I'd like to see Tyler Ulis in the tournament, but he gets taken out of a game. There's not a whole lot more you can do there with Kentucky. They're so reliant on him for just offense of any kind, which is why, and this is not a bold, hot take. I mean, just look at it last night. Rick Barnes outcoached John Calipari, and it wasn't close. To have a 21-point lead and blow it and not be able to make, because here's the thing, they didn't blow the lead after halftime. They started blowing it before halftime. So that means you go into halftime, you have an opportunity to say, okay, guys, it's not over. Don't panic. Don't reel. Here's an adjustment we're going to make. We're going to make this adjustment, and we're going to pull away from Tennessee again. And that didn't happen. There was no adjustment really made after halftime. And Rick Barnes just kept putting it on him. And it's crazy because you're looking at Kevin Punter Jr. just going beast mode, 27 points. Like, where did it all come from? And it would be awesome if we could just see on a more consistent basis more games like that from him. Or if Rick Barnes' thing is going to be to get the ball in his hands and let him create more, because I liked watching him play. Like, I just like watching Kevin Punter Jr. play. And Rick Barnes does well when he's got a great guard and or a great forward, small forward specifically. You know, I think that the Texas teams that he had when he was in Texas, he had Tristan Thompson, who plays for the Cavs now. He had Cameron Ridley, who is still there, but Cameron Ridley was a good player for him. And you're looking at those guys, and they were good at Texas. Miles Turner over he's in Indy now with the Pacers. Good players, right? But those are big guys. Rick Barnes does well when his best players are guards. Guys you never heard of just got maximized at Texas when Rick Barnes was there. Jacobin Brown is probably the greatest example. He was a good point guard for Texas. You never heard of him. Just being in the Rick Barnes system. If Rick Barnes has got a good guard / small forward situation, I mean, he's set. If these guys really start coming into their own under Rick Barnes, you're going to see Tennessee consistently making tournaments again for the next, decade, foreseeably. The only issue is, how far do they go? Because that's why Rick got fired. How far do they go? Again, you're listening to AM 1240 Hot News Talk Radio, the home of Super Bowl 50, which means no other station in Chattanooga is going to give you the pregame, the big game, and the postgame. We've got it all, complete coverage. If you want to, throw a good 8 hours into football, which you can do. I've done it. It's fun. I recommend it if you have the time. You could throw a good 8 hours into just listening to football coverage. You can take it wherever you go. There's no reason why your Sunday has to be stuck in front of a TV. Because I'm a big pregame guy too. Like, I like the NFL Super Bowl pregame, probably more so than the championship pregame of any other sport. There's a whole discussion and just season highlights and all of those things. Well, I mean, you don't have to be stuck in front of a TV. Your wife, your wife or your girlfriend or your kids are like, Dad, let's go outside and do stuff. And then you have to be stuck there. No reason. Take your radio with you. Take your phone with you. Use the TuneIn Radio app in the Apple Store or the Google Play Store. You can have Hot News Talk Radio everywhere you go, including Sunday for Super Bowl 50. You have no excuses. And remember, it's not how you start, it's how you finish. Stay clutch, and I'll see you in 24 hours.
AM 1240 Hot News Talk Radio, the home of Super Bowl 50. From pregame to postgame, the Panthers face the Broncos. Hear all the exciting action live. Tennessee Valley's home for the NFL and Super Bowl 50. AM 1240, HotNewsTalkRadio.com.
You give us 12 minutes and 40 seconds, we'll give you Chattanooga and the world.
Fox News Talk 1240.
AM 1240 Hot News Talk Radio with your Hot News Now update. Heavy rains and flooding have plagued the Tennessee Valley. Multiple accidents have been reported and multiple roads have been closed as well. And the South Chickamauga Creek is expected to flood, reaching 19.5 feet by the end of Thursday. Eastridge High School football coach Tracy Malone, who led the Pioneers to a 12-1 record this season, resigned after a classroom altercation at a time when reportedly he was due to be in class. The incident was investigated, but it was not raised to the level of charges being filed. He resigned nonetheless. An 11-year-old boy is still recovering after a tree fell on him while he was doing